lady, get out! The words cut through me like a knife as my own son, Thomas, towered over me in the living room where I'd rocked him as a baby. His face, once so sweet and innocent, was now twisted with rage, veins bulging at his temples. Behind him stood his wife, Melissa, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of her red-painted lips. They wanted my home, the home my late husband Robert and I had paid for with 30 years of hard work and sacrifice, the home where every scratch on the wooden floor told a story of our family's journey. I clutched my chest, feeling my heart race beneath my trembling fingers. At 73, I never thought I'd be facing homelessness, especially not by the hands of my own flesh and blood. The grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from my father, ticked loudly, marking the seconds of this nightmare unfolding in real time. "I'm not going anywhere, Thomas," I managed to say, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. "This is my home." He laughed then, a cold, unfamiliar sound. "Not anymore. We've discussed this, Mother. You're getting forgetful. The doctor said you need specialized care. We found a nice facility in Cleveland." Facility. The word echoed in my mind. A sterile place where old people went to die, removed from everything familiar, from everything that made life worth living. I knew what he meant. I'd visited my friend Eleanor at one of those places last year before she passed. The smell of disinfectant barely masking bodily odors, the vacant stares, the half-eaten meals on plastic trays. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I insisted, straightening my back despite the arthritis that had been acting up with the spring rain. "Dr. Patterson just gave me a clean bill of health last month. My mind is fine." Thomas exchanged a glance with Melissa, the kind of look that made my stomach turn. They'd rehearsed this, I realized. Every word, every move, calculated to remove me from my own home. "The house is too big for you anyway," Melissa chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "And with the real estate market in Boston being what it is right now, well, it just makes financial sense." Financial sense for whom? I wanted to scream. The 3-bedroom colonial that Robert and I had purchased for $46,000 in 1979 was now worth close to $1 million in this transformed neighborhood. That's what this was about. Not my well-being, not concern for my health. Money, always money. Thomas stepped closer, and I instinctively backed away until I felt the edge of the fireplace mantle against my spine. Above me hung the portrait of Robert in his army uniform, his eyes seeming to watch the scene with the same disbelief I felt. "We're not asking, Mother," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We've already signed the papers. The moving truck is coming tomorrow. Pack what you can carry. The rest stays with the house." "Papers?" My voice cracked. "What papers could you possibly have signed? This house is in my name." Thomas pulled out a document from his inside jacket pocket and unfolded it on the coffee table. "Power of attorney," he said flatly. "Remember when you were in the hospital for your hip last year? You signed this. It gives me the right to make financial and healthcare decisions on your behalf." I remembered signing something, but not this. Never this. The room began to spin slightly, the familiar floral wallpaper blurring at the edges of my vision. "You tricked me," I whispered, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. "We're helping you," Melissa corrected, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Now, let's start with your bedroom. You won't need much where you're going." As they moved toward the staircase, expecting me to follow like a docile lamb to slaughter, I did the only thing I could think of. I reached for the phone on the side table and dialed 911. "What are you doing?" Thomas lunged toward me, but it was too late. "911, what's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. "This is Margaret Wilson at 147 Maple Street," I said, my voice suddenly finding its strength. "I'm being forced out of my home under false pretenses. I need help immediately." Thomas ripped the phone from my hand and slammed it down, but the call had gone through. His face was now purple with rage. "You stupid old woman!" he spat. "You're only making this harder on yourself." But as the words left his mouth, we all heard it, the distinct sound of sirens in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. And in that moment, despite my breaking heart, a tiny spark of defiance ignited within me. My name is Margaret Wilson, Maggie to the few friends I still have left. At 73, I'm what people politely call a senior citizen, though most days I don't feel particularly senior, or like much of a citizen when the world seems determined to push people my age aside. Before this nightmare began, my life had settled into a quiet rhythm after Robert passed away 5 years ago. Our modest colonial home in Lexington, Massachusetts, a suburb about 20 minutes outside of Boston, had become my sanctuary. Every morning, I would wake with the sun, make a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sit in Robert's old armchair by the front window, watching the neighborhood come alive. The Henderson boy delivering newspapers from his bicycle, Mrs. Patel from across the street leaving for her job at the hospital, always in colorful scrubs. Little routines that anchored me to the world. I filled my days tending to my garden. Robert always said I had a way with roses that bordered on magical. Volunteering twice a week at the local library, and occasionally meeting my friend Dolores for lunch at the little cafe on Main Street. Not an exciting life by most standards, but it was mine. And after decades of raising children and supporting Robert's career as an engineer, I had earned this peaceful existence. My Social Security check and Robert's pension weren't lavish, but they covered my modest needs. I had no debt, the house was paid off years ago, and I had always been careful with money, a habit formed during childhood when my father lost his job at the factory and we ate beans for a month straight. I kept an emergency fund in a separate account, just as Robert had taught me. Always have enough to start over if you need to, Maggie, he used to say. Little did I know how prophetic those words would become. Thomas is my only child. We tried for more, Robert and I, but it wasn't in the cards for us. Perhaps that's why we poured everything into him. Our hopes, our dreams, our savings, Harvard education, down payment for his first house, a lavish wedding when he married Melissa 10 years ago. We wanted him to have every advantage we never had. The irony doesn't escape me now. I suppose the changes in Thomas happened so gradually I didn't notice at first. The missed Sunday dinners, the shorter phone calls, the Christmas gifts that became increasingly impersonal, a generic scarf, a gift card, finally just a mailed card with no personal message. When Melissa came into the picture, the distance grew wider. A marketing executive with ambition that matched her expensive taste, she never quite warmed to me. I tried, God knows I tried, bringing her mother's recipes I thought she might enjoy, asking about her work, complimenting her home. But there was always a wall there, invisible but impenetrable. When Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, Thomas was there for the funeral and the immediate aftermath. Then he disappeared back into his life, surfacing only for obligatory holiday visits. I told myself he was busy, building his career. That's what we had raised him to do, after all. My hip fracture last year was the first time I'd been truly vulnerable. After surgery, unable to navigate the stairs at home, I reluctantly agreed to stay with Thomas and Melissa for 2 weeks. Their house in Cambridge was modern, all glass and steel, nothing soft to break a fall. During my stay, I was confined to a guest room that felt more like a hotel than a home. They were always working, leaving early and returning late. Meals were ordered in, left outside my door with a perfunctory knock. It was during this time that Thomas brought papers for me to sign. Just routine medical authorizations, he'd said, in case decisions need to be made while you're recovering. With my reading glasses misplaced and pain medication making me drowsy, I signed where he pointed, trusting my son as I always had. That trust now seems like a luxury I can no longer afford. I had noticed things going missing from the house recently. Small things at first. A silver picture frame, a crystal vase, my mother's cameo brooch. When I mentioned it to Thomas on the phone, he suggested I was misplacing them. "It happens at your age, Mom," he said dismissively. Then larger items began to disappear during his infrequent visits. Robert's vinyl record collection, the antique writing desk that had been in the family for generations. "Just decluttering for you," he explained when I confronted him. "You should be thinking about downsizing anyway. I see the pattern now, of course. They were testing the waters, seeing what they could take without resistance, cataloging the valuable items, perhaps even photographing the house for real estate listings, planning meticulously for this moment when they would try to discard me like an outdated appliance." The sound of the sirens grew louder, and I saw panic flicker across Thomas's face. He hadn't expected me to fight back. Melissa's eyes darted to the front window, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous," Thomas muttered, running his hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache despite everything. "They won't do anything. You're confused, that's all. They'll see that." But I wasn't confused. For the first time in months, perhaps years. I was seeing with perfect clarity. And as the red and blue lights began to flash through the curtains, illuminating the living room in alternating colors, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The stirring of hope, small but persistent, like the first crocus pushing through snow at winter's end. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers, one older with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, the other younger with a military posture and watchful gaze. They introduced themselves as Officer Donovan and Officer Rivera. Thomas immediately stepped forward, hand extended, all charm and confidence. "Thank you for coming, officers, but I'm afraid this is just a family misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "My mother has been experiencing some cognitive decline. We're trying to move her to a facility where she can receive proper care, but she's become agitated." I stood there, stunned by how easily the lies rolled off his tongue. The son I had raised, the boy who once cried because he'd told me a white lie about breaking a neighbor's window, was now constructing an elaborate fiction about my mental state, without a hint of remorse. "Mrs. Wilson," Officer Donovan turned to me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I steadied myself against the armchair. "I'm perfectly fine, officer. What I'm not is senile or in need of a facility. My son and his wife are trying to take my home under false pretenses." Officer Rivera's eyes moved between us, assessing. "Sir, do you have documentation regarding your mother's condition? Any medical diagnosis of cognitive impairment?" Thomas's smile never wavered. "Of course. We've consulted with several specialists. I have power of attorney." He produced the document again, holding it out with confidence. "Everything is in order legally. This is simply a difficult transition, emotionally speaking." The younger officer took the paper, examining it carefully. My stomach knotted as I watched, fearing they would believe him over me. A common occurrence when older people were involved, I'd noticed. "And you are?" Officer Donovan asked Melissa, who had been hanging back. "Melissa Wilson, Thomas's wife." She stepped forward, composed again. "We've been planning this move for months. The facility in Cleveland has an excellent memory care unit. We only want what's best for Margaret." The familiarity with which she used my name, as if we were close, made my skin crawl. In 10 years, she had never once called me Margaret. It had always been Mrs. Wilson, with a slight edge to her voice. "Mrs. Wilson," Officer Rivera addressed me directly. "Have you seen a doctor recently?" "Yes, Dr. James Patterson at Lexington Medical Associates. I had my annual checkup just last month. He noted no concerns about my cognitive function." I spoke clearly, making deliberate eye contact. "You're welcome to contact him." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was information he hadn't anticipated. "That won't be necessary," he interjected quickly. "My mother sees several doctors. The specialists I mentioned—" "Which specialists?" I challenged, feeling bolder. "Name one, Thomas. Just one doctor who has diagnosed me with any form of cognitive decline." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas glanced at Melissa, a flash of panic crossing between them. "Officer," I continued, "this house has been in my name since my husband died. I have the deed in my home office. I never agreed to sell it or move to any facility." Officer Donovan nodded. "Let's see that deed, if you don't mind, ma'am." As I turned to lead him to my office, Thomas blocked my path. "This is unnecessary. The power of attorney gives me—" "Sir," Officer Rivera cut in, "please step aside and allow your mother to retrieve the document." The look Thomas gave me as I passed him was one I'll never forget. Cold fury mixed with something else. Fear, perhaps. The realization that his carefully constructed plan might be unraveling. In my office, I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk where I kept important papers. The deed was there, along with Robert's will, our marriage certificate, and other documents that chronicled our lives together. I handed the deed to Officer Donovan with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the adrenaline coursing through me. He reviewed it carefully, then looked up. "This is indeed in your name, Mrs. Wilson, transferred fully to you after your husband's passing." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When we returned to the living room, Thomas was on his phone, speaking in hushed tones. He quickly ended the call when he saw us. "Officer," he said, his voice taking on an authoritative tone, "I've just spoken with our attorney. The power of attorney document supersedes ownership concerns when healthcare decisions are involved. My mother is not safe living alone." "That's not how power of attorney works," I countered, surprising even myself with my certainty. It doesn't give you the right to sell my property without my consent unless I'm declared legally incompetent by a court." Both officers looked at me with newfound respect. Officer Rivera turned to Thomas. "Sir, your mother appears to understand her legal rights quite clearly." Thomas's facade began to crack. "You don't understand. She's good at hiding it. The episodes come and go." "What episodes?" I demanded. "Tell them about these supposed episodes, Thomas." He faltered, then recovered. "Last month, she left the stove on overnight. The time before that, she got lost driving to the grocery store she's gone to for 30 years. The accusations hit me like physical blows. That's not true. I've never— Mrs. Patel across the street called me about the stove," he insisted. "And the Henderson boy found you wandering the neighborhood in your robe." I was speechless. These were outright fabrications, but delivered with such conviction that I saw doubt creeping into the officer's expressions. Thomas had always been persuasive. It made him excellent at his job in corporate sales. But I never imagined he would use this talent against me. "Maybe we should call this Dr. Patterson," Officer Donovan suggested. "It's after hours," Thomas said quickly. "His office won't be open." Officer Rivera pulled out his notepad. "We can take his information and follow up." While this exchange was happening, I noticed Melissa had slipped away. I heard movements upstairs, drawers opening, closet doors sliding. She was going through my things, collecting valuables perhaps, or searching for something specific. The violation of it made me dizzy with anger. "She's upstairs," I said, pointing toward the ceiling, going through my bedroom. Officer Rivera immediately headed for the stairs, despite Thomas's protests that Melissa was just gathering some essentials for me. What happened next revealed the depth of their betrayal. Officer Rivera returned moments later, Melissa reluctantly following with a familiar jewelry box in her hands. My mother's jewelry box containing pieces that had been in our family for generations. "Found her packing this," Officer Rivera said, along with some documents from a lockbox. Those documents, I knew, included the original of the deed, birth certificates, and, most importantly, my actual medical records that would disprove Thomas's claims about my health. "I was organizing for her," Melissa said defensively. "She asked me to pack her valuables separately." The lie was so blatant, so unnecessary, that something broke inside me, not my heart, that had been fracturing slowly for months, but whatever remaining illusion I had that there might be an innocent explanation for their behavior. "Officers," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I want them out of my house. Now. And I want to know what legal actions I can take to protect myself." Thomas's face contorted with anger. "This is absurd. We're trying to help you." "Help me?" I echoed, finding strength in my outrage. "By lying about my health? By trying to steal my home and belongings? That's not help, Thomas. That's elder abuse." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elder abuse. The legal term for what my own son was attempting to do to me. And judging by the officers' expressions, they recognized it too. "Sir, ma'am," Officer Donovan addressed Thomas and Melissa, "I think it would be best if you left the premises for now. Mrs. Wilson has the right to remain in her home. If you have legitimate concerns about her welfare, there are proper legal channels to address them." "This isn't over," Thomas said, the threat barely veiled. "We'll be back with the proper documentation." As they gathered their coats, Melissa paused by me. "You're making a mistake, Margaret," she whispered, too low for the officers to hear. "You can't manage alone. Next time, there might not be anyone to call for help." The implied threat sent a chill through me, but as the front door closed behind them, and the officers began explaining how I could file for a protective order, I made a silent promise to myself. There wouldn't be a next time, because from this moment forward, I would be prepared. After the police left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea with trembling hands, trying to process what had just happened. As I sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped Thomas with his homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Thanksgivings, where Robert and I had planned our modest vacations, memories flooded back, bittersweet and sharp. I remember the day we brought Thomas home from Massachusetts General Hospital, February 14th, 1977, our Valentine baby. Robert had painted the nursery pale blue and assembled the crib himself, cursing good-naturedly at the confusing instructions. I'd sewn curtains from fabric with tiny sailboats, dreaming of the day we might take our son to see the ocean. "He's perfect," Robert had whispered. His finger caught in Thomas's tiny grasp. Our little miracle. We'd tried for 5 years to have a child. 2 miscarriages had nearly broken my spirit, but Robert never lost faith. "It'll happen when it's meant to, Maggie," he'd say, holding me through nights of silent tears. When Thomas finally arrived, healthy and strong with a powerful set of lungs, it felt like the universe had finally smiled upon us. Those early years were lean, but full of joy. Robert's engineering salary covered the essentials, but little else. I'd taken in mending and alterations, working late into the night after Thomas was asleep to help make ends meet. We'd saved every spare penny for Thomas's college fund, starting when he was still in diapers. I recall one particularly harsh winter when the furnace broke. With no money for immediate repairs, we all slept in the living room for 2 weeks, huddled around the fireplace. Robert and I took turns keeping the fire going through the night, while Thomas slept between us, warm and oblivious to our financial struggles. We ate simple meals, beans, rice, the occasional chicken when it was on sale, and told Thomas it was camping adventure. He thought it was the greatest fun in the world. When spring came and Robert received a small bonus at work, we repaired the furnace and took Thomas to the beach for the first time. His wonder at seeing the vast Atlantic Ocean, his delighted squeals as the cold waves chased his tiny feet. These are the moments that sustained me through harder times. As Thomas grew, so did our sacrifices. Soccer uniforms, science camp, braces, a computer, when they were still a luxury. "He's so bright," his teachers would tell us at conferences. "He has real potential." And he did. Thomas absorbed knowledge like a sponge, excelling particularly in mathematics and debate. When he was accepted to Harvard, the first in either of our families to attend an Ivy League school, Robert and I sat at this very table and cried from pride. The scholarship covered tuition, but not room and board. Without hesitation, I took a second job as a receptionist at a dental office to cover the difference. Robert worked overtime until his hands were calloused, and his back ached constantly. We remortgaged the house we had almost paid off. "Are you sure about this?" Robert had asked me one night, worry lines creasing his forehead. "We're pushing 60. We should be thinking about retirement." "He's our only child," I'd replied. "If we can give him this opportunity, how can we not? We can always work a few more years." And work we did. I packed lunches instead of buying them, cut my own hair, wore the same winter coat for 15 years. Robert drove his car until it wouldn't run anymore, then took the bus for 2 years until we could afford another used vehicle. We never took that trip to the Grand Canyon we'd always talked about. Robert's fishing boat remained a dream deferred. After Harvard came business school. Then Thomas met Melissa during his first job at a consulting firm in Boston. She was beautiful, polished, ambitious, everything I wasn't. From their first introduction over dinner at our home, I sensed her assessment of us. The modest house, my simple cooking, Robert's unfashionable clothes. But Thomas was smitten, and we wanted his happiness above all else. Their wedding was lavish, far beyond what we could comfortably afford, but we contributed everything we could. I remember standing in the bridal shop as Melissa selected a gown that cost more than our first car, nodding with a fixed smile as she dismissed my suggestion to consider the equally beautiful but less expensive alternative. "Mom," Thomas had said afterward, "this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Let's not pinch pennies." Pinch pennies. As if our careful stewardship of resources was a character flaw rather than the very thing that had enabled him to stand in that high-end boutique in the first place. When they decided to buy their first home in Cambridge, an area well beyond what their salaries should have allowed, Robert and I didn't hesitate to offer our savings for the down payment, $65,000 that represented decades of careful planning for our own retirement. "We'll pay you back," Thomas had promised. "Once my career takes off." Robert died still waiting for that repayment. The heart attack came without warning 5 years ago. One moment he was raking leaves in our backyard on a crisp October afternoon. The next, he was gone. The paramedics said it was quick, that he likely felt little pain, a small mercy in an otherwise unbearable loss. Thomas flew in for the funeral, of course, handled the arrangements with efficiency, if not warmth. He and Melissa stayed at a hotel rather than in their old bedroom, citing allergies to our elderly cat, Mr. Whiskers. They left the day after the service, explaining that Thomas had an important presentation he couldn't miss. I scattered Robert's ashes alone on the Massachusetts coastline, where we'd spent our honeymoon. In the weeks that followed, I discovered that Robert had taken out a small life insurance policy, just enough to cover the remaining mortgage and provide me a modest cushion. "Take that trip to the Grand Canyon, Maggie," he'd written in a letter I found among his things. "Live a little for both of us." I never took that trip. Instead, I paid off the house and put the rest aside for emergencies. Robert's pension and my Social Security covered my basic needs, and there was comfort in owning our home outright. Every corner held memories of our life together. The height marks on the kitchen door frame tracking Thomas's growth, the slight dent in the living room wall from when Robert had tried to move the sofa alone, the garden where we'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. After my hip surgery last year, I'd hoped Thomas might show more concern, might remember all we had given him. Instead, his visits were brief and businesslike. He arranged for meals to be delivered twice a week, always the cheapest option from the service, and hired a nursing student to check on me occasionally. But he never stayed, never simply sat with me to talk or reminisce. The realization that came to me now, sitting in my silent kitchen with cold tea before me, was both painful and liberating. The son I had sacrificed everything for no longer existed. Perhaps he never had. The charming, grateful boy I thought I'd raised was gone, or worse, had never been real to begin with. I thought of all the birthdays when Robert and I had scraped together enough for thoughtful gifts for Thomas, while my own birthdays passed with hastily purchased generic cards, if remembered at all. I recalled the Christmas Thomas and Melissa had given us gift certificates to a restaurant chain that didn't even exist in our area, while we'd spent months finding the perfect antique desk for their new home office. The desk they had recently decluttered from my house, I now realized. My reverie was interrupted by the phone ringing, my old-fashioned landline that Thomas had often mocked me for keeping. "Nobody uses those anymore, Mom," he'd say. "Get with the times." But now I was grateful for its reliability, as I answered it with a cautious, "Hello? Mrs. Wilson, this is Officer Donovan. I just wanted to check that everything is okay there." His concern brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Yes, officer. Thank you for calling. I've spoken with my supervisor about your situation," he continued. "We think you should consider filing for an emergency protective order first thing tomorrow. The courthouse opens at 8 a.m. An emergency protective order against my own son. The thought was almost unimaginable, yet here I was, contemplating it with grim resolve. "I'll do that," I said, wiping away a stray tear. Is there anything else I should do tonight?" His pause was brief, but telling. "If you have a friend or relative who could stay with you, that might be a good idea, just as a precaution." After assuring him I would call my friend Dolores, I hung up, the weight of his unspoken concern settling heavily on my shoulders. Thomas wouldn't physically hurt me. I still believed that much. But then again, I'd also believed he would never try to take my home or lie about my mental state. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 10 p.m., too late to impose on Dolores, who had her own health issues to manage. Instead, I methodically began checking the locks on all doors and windows. Then, in a moment of inspiration, I dragged a heavy side table in front of the front door, not enough to keep someone out if they were determined, but enough to create noise and give me warning. As I made these preparations, I found myself in Thomas's old bedroom, preserved largely as he'd left it for college nearly 30 years ago. Trophies lined the shelves, debate team, mathematics competitions, the baseball championship from junior year. On the bulletin board hung faded photographs and ribbons, mementos of a childhood that had seemed happy and secure. I sat on the edge of his bed, running my hand over the Star Wars comforter he'd insisted on keeping through high school, and tried to reconcile the boy who'd built model airplanes on this floor with the man who'd stood in my living room threatening me hours earlier. What had happened? Was it Melissa's influence? The pressure of maintaining their lavish lifestyle? Or had this capacity for coldness always been there, masked by the natural dependence of childhood? My gaze fell on his old desk, and on impulse, I opened the drawers. Most were empty or contained outdated school supplies, but in the back of the bottom drawer, I found a stack of cards, birthday cards, Christmas cards, graduation cards, that Robert and I had given him over the years. Each one contained a handwritten note expressing our pride, our hopes, our unconditional love. He had kept them, all of them. Something about this discovery broke the dam inside me, and I wept. For the little boy who had treasured these expressions of love, for the man who had somehow lost his way, for Robert who wasn't here to help me through this betrayal, and finally, for myself. When the tears subsided, I returned to my bedroom, exhausted but clear-headed. On my nightstand sat a framed photo of Robert, Thomas, and me at Thomas's college graduation. We all looked so happy, so proud, so connected. I turned the frame face down before getting into bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the protective order, changing my accounts, perhaps even finding a lawyer. But as I lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of my home, I made a silent vow. I would not be a victim. I would fight for what was mine. And perhaps most importantly, I would no longer allow my past sacrifices to blind me to present realities. The Thomas I had raised, or thought I had raised, was gone. In his place was a stranger wearing my son's face, and that stranger was not entitled to the fruits of my lifetime of labor and love. With that thought firmly in mind, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of Robert standing guard at our bedroom door, keeping me safe as he always had in life. The protective order was in place by noon the next day. The process had been surprisingly straightforward, especially with Officer Donovan's report backing my claims. The courthouse staff had been kind, guiding me through paperwork with patience I hadn't expected, a small mercy in an otherwise brutal week. This prevents Thomas or Melissa from entering your property or contacting you directly, the judge had explained, a grandmotherly woman with shrewd eyes. It's temporary, 14 days, but we can extend it at the hearing if necessary. I'd nodded, trying to absorb the reality that I needed legal protection from my own child. The document in my hands felt simultaneously like a shield and a white flag, protection and surrender in one official form. Dolores insisted on driving me home and staying for lunch. At 70, with her silver bob and perpetual floral dresses, she looked every bit the retired librarian she was, but her spirit remained fierce. "I always thought Thomas was a bit too polished," she remarked, as she made us turkey sandwiches in my kitchen, like he was performing rather than living. I couldn't disagree, though hearing it spoken aloud stung. "He wasn't always this way," I said, more to convince myself than her. Dolores arched an eyebrow but said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she outlined a plan, helping me change the locks, accompanying me to the bank to secure my accounts, putting me in touch with her nephew who practiced elder law. "People think we're easy targets because we're old," she said, slicing the sandwiches with more force than necessary. Time to show them otherwise. By late afternoon, new locks were installed, and my bank accounts were secured with additional verification steps. I'd made an appointment with Dolores's nephew for the following Monday. Small actions, but each one reinforced the fortress I was building around what remained of my life. After Dolores left, promising to check in that evening, I allowed myself a moment of cautious optimism. Perhaps the protective order would be enough. Perhaps Thomas would recognize he'd crossed a line and retreat, if not with remorse, then at least with the pragmatic recognition that his plan had failed. I should have known better. The call came just after 5 p.m., as I was preparing a simple dinner of soup and toast. An unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway, still running on the adrenaline of the day's activities. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Dr. Lawrence Fleming." The voice was professionally warm, with the practiced cadence of someone used to delivering difficult news. "I'm a geriatric psychiatrist at Boston Memorial. Your son asked me to reach out to you." My spoon clattered against the pot. "I have a protective order against my son. He shouldn't be arranging calls to me." There was a pause. "I see. Well, he's quite concerned about your welfare, Mrs. Wilson. He's described some troubling behaviors and has requested an evaluation. I have an opening tomorrow morning if—" "Did he tell you he tried to force me out of my home yesterday?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Did he mention the police were called?" Another pause. "He explained there was a misunderstanding about living arrangements. Look, Mrs. Wilson, these situations can be complex. Family members often notice cognitive changes before the individual is aware of them. A simple evaluation could set everyone's mind at ease." "My mind is perfectly at ease with my cognitive function, Dr. Fleming," I replied. "My regular physician can confirm this. Now, I believe this call violates the protective order, so I'll be hanging up now." I set the phone down with shaking hands, then immediately called Officer Donovan to report the contact. He promised to follow up, but cautioned me that Thomas might claim the doctor's call was independent, making it difficult to prove a violation. I had just returned to my cooling soup when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw not Thomas or Melissa, but a woman in a tailored navy suit, holding a leather portfolio. I didn't recognize her, but something about her professional demeanor put me instantly on alert. "Mrs. Wilson?" she called through the door. "My name is Jessica Reinhardt. I'm with Adult Protective Services. We've received a concerning report and need to speak with you." Adult Protective Services. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Thomas had escalated, reporting me as an elder in danger, possibly from self-neglect, if his claims about my cognitive state continued. I opened the door, but kept the security chain engaged. "May I see some identification, please?" She held up an official-looking badge. "Of course. I understand this may feel intrusive, but I'm required to investigate any reports we receive." After verifying her credentials as best I could, I reluctantly let her in, my soup now entirely forgotten. "Beautiful home," she commented, glancing around the immaculate living room. "You keep it very nice." "Thank you," I replied stiffly. "I've lived here for over 40 years. Ms. Reinhardt smiled professionally and sat where I indicated. "Mrs. Wilson, we received a report expressing concern about your living situation. The individual, my son, Thomas," I supplied. She nodded. "Yes, he's reported that you've been experiencing memory lapses, confusion, and have become paranoid, even calling the police without cause." "Without cause?" I echoed incredulously. "He and his wife arrived yesterday with a moving truck, planning to force me into a nursing home based on falsified concerns about my mental state. I'd say the police were absolutely called with cause." Ms. Reinhardt made a note on her pad. "I see. And you live alone?" "Since my husband died 5 years ago, yes. Any assistance with daily tasks, meals, cleaning, medications?" "I don't require assistance," I said firmly. "I cook my own meals, maintain my home, manage my own medications, which are limited to a daily vitamin and occasional ibuprofen for arthritis, and am active in my community. I volunteer at the library twice weekly and maintain a garden that's won neighborhood recognition 3 years running." She continued her questioning, asking about everything from my financial management to my social connections, my medical history to my daily routines. I answered each question directly, fighting the humiliation that threatened to overwhelm me. This was what Thomas had reduced me to, having to prove my competence to a stranger in my own living room. "Mrs. Wilson, would you mind if I took a look at your kitchen? Perhaps the bathroom and bedroom as well?" she asked, her tone making it clear this wasn't really a request. I led her through my home, watching as she noted the organized medicine cabinet, the clean refrigerator with fresh food, the absence of any hazards or signs of neglect. Her expression remained neutral, but I detected a slight softening as the tour progressed. Back in the living room, she asked one final question. "Your son mentioned you became disoriented recently and were found wandering the neighborhood in your nightclothes. Can you tell me about that?" "That never happened," I stated flatly. "It's a fabrication, like his claims about me leaving the stove on overnight. You're welcome to speak with any of my neighbors who would confirm I've never wandered anywhere in my nightclothes." Ms. Reinhardt closed her notebook. "Mrs. Wilson, based on my assessment today, I don't see any evidence supporting the concerns that were reported. Your home is well maintained, you're clearly articulate and oriented, and you've demonstrated an ability to care for yourself independently." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. "However," she continued, "these investigations don't typically end with a single visit. We'll need to schedule a more formal cognitive assessment, and I'll need to speak with your physician. There will likely be a follow-up home visit as well." The humiliation I'd been fighting surged back. So despite finding no evidence supporting my son's claims, I'm still to be treated as incompetent until proven otherwise. Her expression turned sympathetic. "I understand this feels invasive, Mrs. Wilson, but the process exists to protect vulnerable adults. If everything checks out as it appears it will, the case will be closed with no further action." After she left, I sank onto the sofa, exhaustion and indignation warring within me. The soup on the stove was cold, my appetite gone. The phone rang twice more that evening, both calls from unknown numbers that I let go to voicemail. One was a reporter from a local news station asking for comment on the Wilson family dispute. The other was from a real estate agent Thomas had apparently contacted, unaware of recent developments. Word was spreading. My private nightmare was becoming public fodder. I was contemplating an early bedtime when a sharp knock at the door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Thomas, alone this time, but his presence still violated the protective order. Instead of opening the door, I called through it. You're not supposed to be here, Thomas. The protective order is clear. Mom, this has gone far enough, he called back, his voice carrying easily through the door and likely to the neighbors as well. You're embarrassing yourself. And us. Open the door so we can talk like adults. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. Please leave before I call the police. I heard him sigh dramatically. I've already spoken with Dr. Patterson. He agrees you need evaluation. This paranoia about us trying to harm you. Dr. Patterson would never discuss my medical information with you without my consent, I interrupted. That's another lie. I have your power of attorney, he shouted, his composure finally cracking. I have every right to discuss your care with your doctors. That power of attorney was obtained under false pretenses, I countered, my own voice rising despite my determination to remain calm. And it doesn't give you the right to override my clearly expressed wishes when I'm fully competent. I could hear him pacing on the porch. Mom, you've left me no choice. If you won't cooperate with voluntary assessment, we'll pursue involuntary commitment. Your behavior is increasingly erratic. The neighbors are concerned. Which neighbors? I challenged. Name one who's expressed concern about my behavior. His silence was telling. Leave now, Thomas, or I'm calling the police. This is your only warning. You'd have your own son arrested? The disbelief in his voice might have moved me once. Now it only reinforced my resolve. You stopped acting like my son the moment you decided my home and possessions were more valuable to you than my autonomy and dignity, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I heard him mutter something under his breath, then his footsteps retreating down the porch steps. Through the side window, I watched him get into his silver BMW and drive away, tires squealing slightly on the quiet street. The confrontation left me shaking, not with fear, but with a slow-burning rage I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. Thomas thought he could wear me down, that I would eventually capitulate rather than endure the public spectacle and bureaucratic nightmare he was creating. He had never been more wrong. I called Officer Donovan again to report the violation of the protective order, then Dolores to update her on the day's events. Her outrage on my behalf was comforting in its ferocity. You should stay with me tonight, Maggie, she insisted, at least until they arrest him for violating the order. But I refused. No, Dolores, I won't be driven from my home. That's exactly what he wants, to make me feel unsafe here, so I'll leave voluntarily. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's chair by the window, watching darkness settle over the neighborhood. Across the street, the Patels' windows glowed warmly. 2 doors down, the Henderson boy practiced his basketball dribbling in the driveway, the rhythmic bouncing a counterpoint to my tumultuous thoughts. These people, my neighbors for decades, had they been told I was losing my mind? Were they watching my house with concern or curiosity? Would they stand as witnesses for me, or believe Thomas's carefully constructed narrative? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, there was another knock at the door. Wearily, I approached, expecting Thomas again, or perhaps another official sent to evaluate me. Instead, I found Mrs. Patel, holding a covered dish that smelled of cardamom and ginger. Margaret, she said when I opened the door cautiously, I made too much dinner. I thought you might like some. The simple kindness nearly undid me. Thank you, Aruna. That's very thoughtful. She glanced behind her, then lowered her voice. Your son came to our house earlier today. He was asking strange questions about you. If we'd seen you confused or doing unusual things, my husband told him we've never seen anything but a sharp-minded neighbor who brings us tomatoes from her garden and collects our mail when we visit our daughter in Chicago. Relief and gratitude washed over me. He's trying to have me declared incompetent so he can take my house, I explained, the words still painful to say aloud. Aruna's expression hardened. We figured it was something like that. The Hendersons said he approached them too, trying to get them to sign some statement about you wandering outside inappropriately. And did they? I asked, holding my breath. Of course not, she scoffed. Bill Henderson said he told your son that in 20 years, the only inappropriate behavior he'd ever witnessed on this street was your son's college parties when you and Robert went to visit your sister that one summer. A startled laugh escaped me, the first genuine laugh in days. The memory of returning from that trip to find our usually immaculate lawn littered with beer bottles had been infuriating at the time. Now it felt like evidence of a simpler form of youthful selfishness. Several of us are concerned, not about you, Margaret, but about what your son is trying to do, Aruna continued. If you need witnesses or statements about your daily activities and mental clarity, Just say the word. This neighborhood takes care of its own." As she left, something shifted within me. The humiliation and despair that had threatened to consume me began to recede, replaced by a steely determination. I was not alone. I was not without resources, and I was not going to be a passive victim in Thomas's calculated scheme. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the nightmare began. In the morning, I would contact Dolores's nephew about invalidating the power of attorney. I would gather statements from my neighbors. I would file a formal complaint about Thomas's violation of the protective order. But more importantly, I would begin searching for whatever legal leverage Thomas feared might exist, because his increasingly desperate actions suggested he was afraid of something, some document, some evidence, some legal reality that would completely undermine his plans, and I intended to find it. Dawn broke with a clarity that matched my newfound resolve. I awoke before my alarm, the weight of yesterday's humiliations transformed into purpose. As I moved through my morning routine, brewing tea, toasting bread, opening curtains to let in the spring sunlight, I felt different, sharper, more focused than I had been in years. The Margaret Wilson who had existed a week ago, the accommodating mother, the woman who made excuses for her son's neglect, who interpreted coldness as busyness, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who recognized that the time for maternal blindness had passed. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began to make lists. People to contact, documents to locate, questions that needed answers. My handwriting, which had grown somewhat shaky in recent years, appeared surprisingly steady on the yellow page. First call, James Sullivan, Dolores's nephew, the elder law attorney. His secretary put me through immediately when I mentioned Dolores's name. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted me, his voice warm but professional. "Aunt Dee filled me in on some of what's happening. I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I need to understand exactly what this power of attorney my son claims to have actually entitles him to do. Do you have a copy of the document?" "No," I admitted. "He showed it to the police, but I never received a copy." "That's our first order of business then," he said. "I'll file a request for production. In the meantime, let's get you in here this afternoon instead of Monday. The sooner we start building your case, the better." By 2 p.m., I was seated in James Sullivan's downtown office, surrounded by law books and family photographs. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s perhaps, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses, and the same directness that characterized his aunt. "Mrs. Wilson, I've reviewed the notes from your conversation with my assistant," he began. "I want to be very clear about something. What your son is attempting constitutes elder abuse under Massachusetts law. It's not just morally wrong, it's illegal." Hearing it stated so plainly was both validating and devastating. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I've taken the liberty of filing an emergency motion to suspend the power of attorney pending investigation," he continued. "Given the protective order and police report, we have strong grounds, but I need to prepare you. This may get uglier before it gets better." "Uglier how?" I asked. "If Thomas has been planning this for some time, as it appears he has, he may have laid groundwork we're not yet aware of, medical consultations you weren't informed about, discussions with neighbors or friends that mischaracterized your behavior, possibly even financial maneuvers designed to make you appear incapable of managing your affairs." The systematic nature of such planning sent a chill through me. "You think he's been orchestrating this for months?" James leaned forward. "Mrs. Wilson, may I call you Margaret?" When I nodded, he continued, "Margaret, in my experience, these situations rarely arise spontaneously. The protective instinct toward aging parents doesn't suddenly transform into predatory behavior overnight. There's usually a motivation, often financial, and a progression of boundary testing." His words triggered memories. Thomas helping with my taxes last year, and suggesting I no longer needed separate accounts. The increasing frequency with which he'd remarked on the value of my home during his infrequent visits. His subtle undermining when I'd mentioned taking a cruise with Dolores. "At your age, Mom, what if something happened abroad?" "The house," I said slowly, realization dawning. "It's not just about the house itself, is it? It's about timing." James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Property values in my neighborhood have skyrocketed in the past 2 years. The Morgans down the street sold their home. smaller than mine, for $1.2 million in December. And there's been talk of a luxury development company buying up properties for a new project. James was already typing notes. That would certainly provide motive. Let's look into recent sales and development plans. He paused. Margaret, is there a mortgage on your home? No. It's been fully paid off for 5 years. And your will? Who is the beneficiary? Thomas is my only child, so he inherits everything. At least that was the plan. The last sentence surprised even me with its implication. James nodded, understanding. We can discuss amendments to your estate planning if you wish. But first, let's focus on protecting you and your assets now. He glanced at his notes again. You mentioned your husband's life insurance paid off the remainder of your mortgage. Were there other policies or investments? I started to shake my head, then stopped, a memory surfacing. Robert had a small pension from his engineering firm, and there was a secondary life insurance policy through his professional association. I received some paperwork about it after the funeral, but with everything happening, I trailed off, embarrassed. I'm afraid I put it aside to deal with later and then never did. That's completely understandable, James assured me. Grief makes it difficult to manage administrative tasks. Do you still have the paperwork? It should be in Robert's filing cabinet in the home office. That might be worth investigating. Sometimes these policies have significant value that beneficiaries aren't aware of. He made another note. Now, about the power of attorney. Do you recall signing anything during your hip recovery last year? I described the circumstances. The pain medication, the missing reading glasses, Thomas's hurried explanation of routine medical authorizations. James's expression darkened. If you were not fully informed about what you were signing, or if you were under the influence of medication that impaired your judgment, we may have grounds to invalidate the document entirely. Even without those factors, a power of attorney can be revoked by the principal. That's you, at any time if you're competent. But that's exactly what Thomas is trying to challenge. My competence, I pointed out. Yes, but the burden of proof is on him, not you. You don't have to prove you're competent. He has to prove you're not. And from what you've told me and what I can observe myself, he'd have a very difficult time making that case. For the next 2 hours, James guided me through a comprehensive plan. We drafted a formal revocation of the power of attorney. He arranged for a geriatric psychiatrist of his choosing, not Thomas's, to conduct a cognitive assessment that would establish my competence conclusively. We began the process of placing my home in a protective trust that would prevent any sale or transfer without multiple approvals. One more thing, James said as our meeting concluded. I'd like you to temporarily grant me limited power of attorney, just for legal and administrative matters. This would allow me to request documents, represent you in court if necessary, and generally run interference without you having to be present for every procedural step. The suggestion made me hesitate. After all, inappropriate use of power of attorney was what had started this nightmare. James noted my reluctance. I understand your concern, Margaret. The document I'm proposing is narrowly defined, time-limited, and revocable at any time. You'd maintain full control over your medical decisions and finances. Think of it as authorizing me to be your legal voice when needed. Nothing more. After reviewing the document carefully, with my reading glasses firmly in place, I signed. Unlike Thomas's deception, this felt like putting on armor rather than shackles. As I left the office with copies of everything we'd filed and a follow-up appointment scheduled, James walked me to my car. Margaret, he said quietly, I want to prepare you for something difficult. In cases like this, when the financial stakes are high and legal challenges are mounted, family members sometimes become desperate. They may say hurtful things, make accusations, or try to isolate you from support systems. I thought of Thomas's face when the police had arrived, the cold fury in his eyes as he realized his plan was derailed. I understand. Good. Now, is there somewhere else you could stay for a few days? Just until we have the emergency hearings? I considered this, thinking of Dolores's offer, but something in me rebelled at the idea of leaving my home, the very thing I was fighting to protect. No, I said firmly. I won't be driven out. That sends exactly the wrong message about my independence and capability. James didn't argue. In that case, let's take some additional precautions. He outlined security measures, changing my phone number, installing a simple security camera at my front door, arranging for a service to document any attempts by Thomas to enter my property or contact me in violation of the protective order. By the time I returned home that afternoon, I felt like a different person than the one who had left that morning. The fear and confusion that had clouded my thinking since Thomas's attempted takeover was gone, replaced by clear-eyed determination. The first thing I did was head to Robert's office, the small second bedroom we had converted when he retired. Everything remained as he had left it. Engineering journals stacked neatly on shelves, his ancient calculator on the desk, the framed certificates of his professional accomplishments on the wall. I'd avoided spending time here after his death, finding the emptiness of the space too painful. Now, I regretted that avoidance. What else had I missed by looking away from difficult realities? I located the filing cabinet key in Robert's desk drawer and began systematically going through the meticulously labeled folders. My husband had been nothing if not organized, a trait Thomas had inherited, but twisted into something colder, more calculating. In the insurance folder, I found what I was looking for. Documentation of a professional association, life insurance policy I'd completely forgotten about in the fog of grief. According to the paperwork, the death benefit was $350,000, far more substantial than the small policy that had paid off our mortgage. The beneficiary was listed as me, with Thomas as secondary beneficiary. But there was something odd. The packet included a carbon copy of a claim form, partially filled out in what appeared to be Thomas's handwriting, but never completed or submitted. Why would he have started the claim process but not finished it? And why hadn't he ever mentioned this policy to me? A suspicion began to form, but I needed more information before jumping to conclusions. I continued my search, moving to the financial records section, where I found statements from a joint investment account Robert and I had opened decades ago. The most recent statement, dated 4 months after Robert's death, showed a balance of nearly $180,000 from conservative investments made throughout our marriage. I had no memory of accessing this account after Robert's death. In fact, I wasn't sure I would have known how to, given that Robert had always handled our investments. I would have expected Thomas, with his business background, to have mentioned this account during the settling of his father's affairs, unless he had his reasons for not bringing it to my attention. With growing unease, I pulled out the property folder, which contained our mortgage documents, stamped paid in full, property tax records, and, to my surprise, a recent appraisal of our home that I had never requested. The appraisal, dated just 3 months ago, valued the property at $1.75 million, significantly higher than I would have guessed. Even more disturbing was that it had been ordered by T. Wilson as POA for M. Wilson. Thomas had been using the power of attorney long before his attempt to move me out, using it to gather information, assess values, and apparently prepare for the eventual sale of my home without my knowledge or consent. But the most damning discovery came in a folder labeled simply Letters. Inside were drafts of correspondence between Thomas and the luxury development company I'd mentioned to James, Riverview Holdings. The earliest was dated 8 months ago, inquiring about their interest in a prime property in the Lexington Historic District. Subsequent letters discussed potential terms, timelines, and the need for resolving current occupancy issues. My hands trembled as I read, not with age or fear, but with a cold, clarifying anger. Thomas hadn't just recently decided my home would be better monetized than maintained as my residence. He'd been planning this, negotiating this, for the better part of a year, all while smiling during his infrequent visits, all while claiming concern for my welfare. I gathered the most relevant documents and placed them in a new folder labeled Evidence. Then I called James Sullivan, my voice steady despite the emotional earthquake I was experiencing. "James, I found something you need to see. Several somethings, actually. I can come by tomorrow morning," he offered immediately. "Please do. I believe I've discovered why Thomas has been so determined to gain control of my property, and it appears he may have concealed significant assets that rightfully belong to me." After hanging up, I sat at Robert's desk for a long time, surrounded by the paper trail of my son's betrayal. The scope of it was breathtaking. Not just the attempt to force me out, but the months of calculated planning, the deliberate concealment of assets, the negotiations conducted literally behind my back regarding property that was not his to sell. In that moment of perfect clarity, I finally accepted what I had been resisting. The son I thought I knew was a fiction. The real Thomas was the man revealed in these documents, calculating, dishonest, willing to discard his own mother for financial gain. The grief of this realization was profound, a different kind of death to mourn. But alongside that grief arose something unexpected, a sense of liberation. No longer would I twist myself into knots trying to explain away his neglect or justify his coldness. No longer would I blame myself for some imagined failing in his upbringing. The truth, however painful, was cleaner than the confusion and self-doubt I'd been living with. As the evening light faded from the window, I gathered the evidence folder and left Robert's office, closing the door behind me. In our bedroom, I removed the family photographs that had lined my dresser for years. Thomas's graduation, his wedding, the forced Christmas gathering 2 years ago, and placed them in a drawer, out of sight. In their place, I set a single photograph I found in Robert's desk, the two of us on our 30th anniversary, standing on the Massachusetts coastline, gray-haired but beaming, arms wrapped around each other against the October chill, a reminder of what real love and loyalty look like. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out a legal pad and began to write, not lists this time, but a letter to my younger self, the mother who had sacrificed everything for a son who would eventually betray her. I wrote about the warning signs I'd missed, the excuses I'd made, the boundaries I should have established. I wrote about the difference between loving support and self-abnegation, between generosity and martyrdom. It wasn't about blame, either of myself or Thomas. It was about understanding, about tracing the path that had led us here, about acknowledging that good intentions don't always yield good outcomes. When I finished writing, it was nearly midnight. I felt exhausted but calm, hollowed out yet somehow more complete than I had been in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal battles, emotional confrontations, public scrutiny. But for the first time since Thomas had appeared on my doorstep with eviction in his eyes, I felt ready. I was no longer just fighting to keep my home. I was fighting to reclaim my life, my autonomy, my identity beyond motherhood. And in that fight, I had already won the most important battle, the one within myself. Morning found me at the kitchen table with James Sullivan. Spread before us the evidence I'd discovered in Robert's office. James examined each document methodically, occasionally making notes or taking photographs with his phone. His expression grew increasingly grave as the pattern emerged. "Margaret," he said finally, setting down the correspondence with Riverview Holdings. "This is substantial. We're not just looking at an attempt to place you in assisted living against your will. These documents suggest financial exploitation, possible fraud, and numerous breaches of fiduciary duty under the power of attorney." "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked, wrapping my hands around my teacup for warmth despite the spring morning sunshine streaming through the windows. "It means we're moving beyond civil proceedings into potential criminal territory." He tapped the investment account statements. "Hiding these assets from you, especially while acting as your financial agent under the POA, is a serious offense in Massachusetts. And these negotiations with the development company," he shook his head, "attempting to sell property he doesn't own, using a POA he obtained under questionable circumstances? The district attorney would be very interested in this." The thought of Thomas facing criminal charges created a complicated knot of emotions within me. Grief at how far things had deteriorated, vindication that his actions were being taken seriously, and if I was honest, a small hard kernel of satisfaction that he would face consequences. "What's our next step?" I asked. "I've already filed the emergency motion to invalidate the POA, as we discussed yesterday. With this new evidence, I'll amend that filing immediately. I'll also submit a formal complaint to the state's Elder Protective Services Division, not the local branch that Thomas already contacted, but the state-level investigators who handle complex financial exploitation cases." He gathered the documents carefully. "With your permission, I'd like to bring in a forensic accountant to trace any financial maneuvers Thomas may have made using the POA. There could be more we haven't uncovered yet." I nodded, remembering the partially completed insurance claim form. "The life insurance policy. Do you think he was planning to intercept that money somehow?" "It's possible. He may have been gathering the necessary information to file the claim as your agent, then redirect the funds. We'll need to contact the insurance company directly to secure those benefits and ensure they're paid to you properly." As James continued outlining our strategy, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery van in my driveway. "I'm not expecting anything," I said, a note of wariness creeping into my voice after the events of the past week. James stood. "I'll go with you." The delivery turned out to be a package requiring signature. After the driver left, I carried the box to the kitchen table. "It's from Robert's old company," I said, noting the return address. "Wellington Engineering." Inside was a sealed envelope and a folded blue blanket with the company logo, the kind of corporate gift often sent to retiring employees or their families. The accompanying note explained that they were finally clearing out old storage areas and had found items belonging to Robert that they thought I might want. The blanket was a retirement gift apparently never delivered due to a departmental oversight. 5 years later, I murmured, running my hand over the soft material. Better late than never, I suppose. But it was the sealed envelope that drew my attention. Thick and official looking, it bore Robert's name and our address, with confidential pension amendment stamped across the front. I opened it carefully to find a set of documents dated 6 months before Robert's death. Paperwork confirming his election to take a reduced pension benefit during his lifetime so that I would continue to receive 100% of the payments after his death, rather than the standard 50%. "I didn't know about this," I said softly. He never mentioned making this change. James reviewed the documents. According to this, the adjustment would have been substantial. Instead of receiving half his pension after his death, you're entitled to the full amount, $40,200 monthly instead of $2,100, and it should have taken effect immediately upon verification of his death. I frowned. But I've only been receiving $2,100 monthly since he died. The deposits come automatically. I never questioned the amount because it was what I expected. James's expression sharpened. Who notified the pension administrator of Robert's death? Thomas handled all of that. He said he wanted to spare me the paperwork while I was grieving. Did you ever receive any confirmation documents? Forms to sign as the surviving spouse? I tried to remember through the fog of those first awful months after Robert's death. There were so many papers back then. I signed what Thomas put in front of me. He said it was all standard procedure. James was already on his phone, searching for contact information for Wellington Engineering's benefits department. "We need to find out what documentation they received regarding your benefits election. If Thomas submitted paperwork requesting the lower benefit amount while having knowledge of this amendment." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both understood the implication. For 5 years, I had received only half the pension I was entitled to, a difference of over $125,000. Money that had either been redirected elsewhere or simply never claimed, allowing Thomas to point to my supposedly precarious financial situation as justification for helping me with my affairs. While James made the call to Wellington, stepping into the living room for better reception, I sat staring at the blue blanket. Such a simple thing, yet its arrival had triggered a revelation that might never have come otherwise. I thought of Robert, always planning ahead, always taking care of details quietly without seeking credit. He had chosen to receive less during his own lifetime to ensure I would be secure if he died first, and Thomas had apparently undermined that final act of love, possibly redirecting the additional funds for his own use, or simply blocking me from receiving them to maintain control over my finances. James returned, his expression grim but satisfied. "They're pulling the records now, but the customer service representative confirmed that someone claiming to be your financial agent contacted them shortly after Robert's death. They were instructed to continue the standard 50% survivor benefit, rather than the enhanced option Robert had selected. They sent confirmation paperwork to this address that would have required your signature, but they received it back with what appeared to be your signature already on it." "I never saw any such document," I said, anger rising in my chest. "He must have forged my signature. We'll need to obtain copies of everything, but based on what we know so far, it seems increasingly likely that Thomas has been engaged in a systematic pattern of financial exploitation." I nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "That explains why he's been so insistent that I need to be careful with money these past few years, why he's questioned every small expenditure. He wasn't concerned about my financial welfare. He was maintaining the fiction that I was barely getting by, so I wouldn't question why my supposedly substantial inheritance from Robert seemed so meager, and possibly laying groundwork to suggest you were no longer capable of managing your finances," James added, creating a narrative of increased financial vulnerability that would support his claim that you needed his oversight. The doorbell rang again, this time revealing Dr. Sophia Martinez, the geriatric psychiatrist James had arranged for my competency evaluation. As James prepared to leave with copies of all our evidence, he squeezed my shoulder gently. "You're doing extraordinarily well, Margaret. Most people in your situation would be overwhelmed, But you're methodical and clear-headed. That's going to serve you well in what's coming next." After he left, Dr. Martinez conducted a thorough evaluation: cognitive tests, memory assessments, judgment scenarios, even basic physical checks of my coordination and reflexes. Throughout the 3-hour process, I remained calm and focused, answering each question with care, but not anxiety. "Mrs. Wilson," she said as we concluded, "based on my assessment today, I find no evidence whatsoever of cognitive impairment. Your memory, judgment, and executive function are all consistent with, perhaps even superior to, what we would expect for someone your age. I'll be providing a complete report to Mr. Sullivan, but I wanted you to know my conclusion immediately." Relief washed over me. Though I had never truly doubted my own competence, having it professionally confirmed removed a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. "Thank you, doctor. Will your assessment be sufficient to counter any claims my son might make about my mental state?" She nodded firmly. "My evaluation is comprehensive and follows all standard protocols. Any court would consider it authoritative, especially given my credentials in geriatric psychiatry. If Thomas wishes to challenge it, he would need to provide substantial concrete evidence of cognitive dysfunction, not just anecdotal claims about misplaced items or occasional forgetfulness." After she left, I found myself drawn once again to Robert's office. This time, I settled into his chair fully, not just perching anxiously at the edge as I had yesterday. The leather creaked familiarly as I leaned back, imagining Robert sitting here, making the decision to reduce his own pension to protect my future without ever mentioning the sacrifice to me. On impulse, I opened the bottom desk drawer, a deep one where he had kept personal items separate from business documents. Inside was a collection of mementos, ticket stubs from concerts we'd attended, a small rock from the Maine coastline where we'd spent our 20th anniversary, a dried corsage from Thomas's wedding. Beneath these treasures was a sealed envelope addressed to me in Robert's neat engineer's handwriting. "For Maggie. Open if needed." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal, wondering what message from the past awaited me. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before his death, and a flash drive taped to the paper. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means you found yourself in some situation where you need additional resources or protection that I'm no longer able to provide in person. I pray that day never comes, but an engineer plans for contingencies. You've teased me about that often enough over the years. I've worried increasingly about Thomas's attitude toward money and property. The changes in him since he married Melissa concern me. The growing materialism, the subtle dismissiveness toward our more modest lifestyle, the questions about the house's value that seem to come up whenever they visit. I may be overreacting. Fathers and sons often have complicated relationships, as you know, but my instincts tell me to prepare for the possibility that he might not always have your best interests at heart after I'm gone. On the enclosed drive, you'll find complete documentation of all our financial accounts, insurance policies, and investments, including account numbers and passwords. I've also included recordings of several conversations with Thomas, where he made concerning statements about monetizing our home when we no longer need so much space. His tone and implications disturbed me deeply, but I chose not to confront him directly until I had more concrete evidence of his intentions. Most importantly, I've established a secondary account at First National Bank of Boston, under both our names, but with a different address, your sister Jean's, for statements and correspondence. I've transferred $200,000 from my inheritance from my father into this account. Thomas knows nothing about this money, and the account is structured so that it cannot be accessed through any general power of attorney, only through physically presenting identification at the bank. This isn't about not trusting our son, Maggie. It's about ensuring you have resources that are completely under your control, no matter what happens. I've seen too many widows left vulnerable, even with the best estate planning, and I refuse to let that be your fate. You've been the light of my life for 43 years. My greatest hope is that this letter will gather dust in my drawer, unneeded and eventually forgotten. But if the day comes when you do need it, know that even then, even beyond whatever separated us, I am still trying to take care of you as you've always taken care of me. All my love, always. Robert. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Not tears of sadness, but of profound gratitude for the man who had loved me enough to prepare for eventualities he hoped would never materialize. Robert had seen what I hadn't allowed myself to see, the gradual transformation of our son into someone who viewed family relationships through the lens of financial opportunity. The The flash drive contained exactly what Robert had promised: comprehensive documentation of our financial life together, including accounts I hadn't known existed. Most revelatory were the recorded conversations, captured during Robert's final months. In one, Thomas could be clearly heard suggesting that the house was wasted on us now that we were getting up there, casually mentioning friends who had helped their parents transition to senior communities while leveraging their real estate assets more productively. Robert's responses had been non-committal, but probing, drawing out Thomas's true attitudes while appearing to simply engage in father-son conversation. It was masterfully done, the engineer's precision applied to emotional intelligence, and it had produced damning evidence of Thomas's mindset long before he attempted to physically remove me from my home. The most stunning revelation was the bank account Robert had established. I immediately called the number provided in his letter, and after verifying my identity, learned that the account now contained nearly $240,000 with accumulated interest, money Thomas had no knowledge of and no access to. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt not just determined, but powerful. Robert had given me not only financial resources, but also informational leverage. Thomas had been operating under the assumption that I was isolated, uninformed, and financially dependent on the drip feed of resources he controlled. He had no idea that I now had access to funds beyond his reach, and evidence of his exploitative intentions dating back years. I called James immediately, describing everything I'd discovered. His response was immediate and emphatic. "Margaret, this changes everything." Robert essentially created a documented trail of Thomas's predatory intentions and gave you financial independence at the same time. Combined with what we uncovered earlier today, we now have overwhelming evidence not just for invalidating the power of attorney, but potentially for criminal charges of elder financial exploitation. I don't know if I want criminal charges, I admitted, the mother in me still hesitant to see my only child prosecuted, despite everything. I just want my life back, my home, my independence. I understand, James said gently, and ultimately that will be your decision to make. But having the option gives us tremendous leverage in negotiations. Thomas will be facing not just the loss of his power of attorney, but potentially his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom. That changes the calculation significantly. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's chair for a long time, the letter in my lap, the weight of decisions before me. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the backyard where Thomas had once played, where Robert had tended his vegetable garden, where our family had shared countless summer barbecues and winter snowball fights. This house wasn't just valuable real estate to be monetized. It was the physical embodiment of our family's history, both the joyful chapters and now the painful ones. Fighting for it wasn't just about protecting a financial asset. It was about honoring that history and preserving my place within it. As evening fell, I made a simple dinner and ate it not at the kitchen table, but in the formal dining room we had typically reserved for special occasions. I used the good china, lit candles, and poured a glass of the red wine Robert and I had always shared on our anniversary. A small act of reclamation, of self-respect. Halfway through the meal, my phone rang, James calling with an update. "Margaret, the judge has granted our emergency motion. Thomas's power of attorney has been temporarily suspended pending the full hearing next week. Additionally, the court has issued a temporary freeze on any financial accounts Thomas might have access to in your name." "That's wonderful news," I said, relief flooding through me. "There's more," James continued. "The forensic accountant found something interesting. It appears Thomas has been using a shell company called Wilson Family Holdings to purchase properties in the Lexington area. 3 so far, all on your street or nearby. The timing correlates with the development company's interest in creating a luxury condominium complex." Understanding dawned. "He's been buying up properties to package with mine for the development deal." "Exactly. And using funds that appear to trace back to your diverted pension payments as seed money for the initial purchases. He's leveraged that into loans for the subsequent acquisitions. It's quite the scheme. Not necessarily illegal on its face, but definitely improper, given the source of the initial capital and his fiduciary obligations to you under the POA. I thought about the neighbors who had recently sold and moved away, the Johnsons, the Carpenters, the elderly Simmons sisters, all replaced by temporary renters. Had they unwittingly sold to my son's shell company? Were they part of the package he was assembling for Riverview Holdings, with my home as the centerpiece? "What does this mean for us legally?" I asked. "It strengthens our position considerably. Thomas wasn't just trying to control your assets. He was actively using his position as your agent to advance a complex real estate deal that would benefit him substantially. That's a textbook conflict of interest and breach of fiduciary duty." After hanging up, I didn't return to my solitary dinner. Instead, I went to the front window and looked out at my neighborhood, the street I had lived on for over 40 years, where I knew every house and had watched families come and go. Thomas hadn't just been trying to take my home. He had been working to fundamentally transform the entire community, erasing its history and character in favor of luxury development that would price out the remaining longtime residents. The scope of his betrayal extended beyond me to everything and everyone I valued. And in that moment, my lingering maternal reluctance to hold him fully accountable finally dissolved completely. Tomorrow, I would tell James to pursue every legal avenue available, civil, criminal, whatever was necessary to stop Thomas's scheme and protect not just myself, but my neighborhood. I would contact those neighbors who remained and share what I had learned. I would become not just a victim fighting back, but an advocate for my community. As I returned to the dining room and raised my wine glass in a silent toast to Robert, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, I was certain of my path, and I would not walk it alone. The week that followed brought a whirlwind of activity as we prepared for the hearing that would determine whether Thomas's power of attorney would be permanently invalidated. James Sullivan worked tirelessly, gathering depositions from my neighbors, collecting documentation from Robert's company about the pension manipulation, and working with the forensic accountant to trace every financial maneuver Thomas had made, using his inappropriately obtained authority. I threw myself into the preparation with equal vigor. Gone was the shock and hurt that had initially paralyzed me. In its place was a steely determination that surprised even me with its intensity. My first step was to secure my home physically. With James's help, I arranged for a security system to be installed. Nothing flashy or obvious, just discreet cameras at entry points and a silent alarm that would alert both me and the police of any unauthorized entry. The technician, a kind-faced man named Ray, worked quickly and explained everything clearly. "Most folks your age get these systems because they're afraid of strangers breaking in," he commented as he tested the front door sensor. "First time I've installed one to keep out family. Sometimes strangers are kinder than family," I replied, thinking of the officers who had protected me, the neighbors who had rallied around me, the professionals like James who had believed me without question. Ray nodded solemnly. "Ain't that the truth? My sister's husband cleaned out their accounts and disappeared to Florida with his secretary, left her with 3 kids and a mountain of debt. Family can do you worse than any burglar." His matter-of-fact acknowledgement of this painful reality was oddly comforting. I wasn't alone in experiencing betrayal by those who should have been most trustworthy. With my home secured, I turned my attention to my financial life. Using the information Robert had left me and James's expert guidance, I systematically transformed my vulnerable position into one of strength. We documented every unauthorized transaction Thomas had made. We initiated the process to claim the full pension I was entitled to, including back payments for the diverted funds. We filed paperwork to reclaim control of the investment account Thomas had concealed from me. Most significantly, I opened new accounts at a different bank, transferring funds from Robert's secret account to establish my financial independence. I arranged for my Social Security and corrected pension payments to be deposited directly to these new accounts, which Thomas had no knowledge of and no access to. "You're essentially creating a parallel financial existence," James explained during one of our daily strategy sessions at my dining room table. "Even if Thomas somehow manages to retain some access to your old accounts, which is highly unlikely given the evidence we've amassed, he'll find them empty. The resources he thought he controlled have been moved beyond his reach." The methodical dismantling of Thomas's financial leverage brought a satisfaction that helped ease the continuing pain of his betrayal. Each account secured, each asset reclaimed, was a step toward reclaiming not just my resources but my dignity. Throughout this process, Thomas made several attempts to contact me, all in violation of the protective order. He left voicemails on my landline before I had it changed, each message shifting in tone from commanding to cajoling, to threatening as days passed. The security cameras captured him, driving slowly past the house 3 times, though he never attempted to enter. Each violation was documented, and added to our growing file. Perhaps most telling was his approach to James directly. A voice message left at the law office that James played for me during one of our meetings. Mr. Sullivan, this is Thomas Wilson. I understand you're representing my mother in some misguided legal action. I want to be clear. She's not mentally capable of making these decisions, and you're taking advantage of a vulnerable senior. I have medical opinions supporting this, and I'm prepared to sue you personally for elder exploitation if you continue pursuing this case. That said, I'm willing to discuss a reasonable resolution that respects her needs while acknowledging the reality of her condition. Call me back if you want to avoid making this unnecessarily messy. James had raised an eyebrow as the message ended. Notice he never actually specifies what medical opinions he has, because there aren't any, and the threat to sue me personally is an amateur intimidation tactic. But most revealing is his immediate pivot to negotiation. He's realizing his position is weakening, and he's looking for an exit strategy. Will you call him back? I asked. Eventually, yes, but on our terms, not his. First, we gather all our evidence, secure your position completely, and prepare our demands. When we do engage, it will be from a position of overwhelming strength, not as supplicants seeking compromise. James's strategic approach reminded me of chess, which Robert had taught me to play during our early marriage. The key was not just making good individual moves, but seeing several moves ahead, anticipating your opponent's responses, and setting traps they wouldn't recognize until it was too late. Thomas had assumed I would be an easy opponent to overwhelm with aggressive opening moves. He hadn't anticipated that I might have resources beyond what he could see, or allies willing to help me counterattack. As our preparations continued, I reconnected with neighbors beyond Mrs. Patel, people I'd known for decades, but had gradually seen less of as Robert's death and my own increasing isolation had taken their toll. I learned that Thomas had indeed approached several of them, expressing concerns about my mental state and floating the idea that the neighborhood was becoming too much for aging residents to manage. Bill Henderson, whose son had once delivered newspapers to our door, was particularly outraged. He had the nerve to suggest you'd be happier in a community of your peers, whatever that means, he told me over coffee at my kitchen table. I reminded him that you've been an active member of the neighborhood watch for 20 years and organized the book collection for the library renovation just last summer. Doesn't sound like someone who can't manage community living to me. These conversations revealed the extent of Thomas's groundwork, the careful construction of a narrative about my supposed decline that he'd been building long before his attempted takeover. But they also revealed how unsuccessful that effort had largely been. My neighbors knew me, had seen me functioning independently and capably for years, and were not easily persuaded by Thomas's concerned son routine. Several offered to testify at the hearing if needed, including Mrs. Patel, who had witnessed Thomas's aggressive behavior firsthand, and Dr. Lydia Chen, a retired physician who lived 3 doors down and who had interacted with me regularly at community events. I may not be practicing anymore, Dr. Chen told me firmly, but I still know the difference between normal aging and cognitive impairment. You show no signs of the latter, and I'd be happy to state that under oath. With each conversation, each offer of support, my isolation, the very condition that had made me vulnerable to Thomas's manipulations, continued to dissolve. I was becoming reintegrated into the web of community connections that Thomas had subtly encouraged me to withdraw from after Robert's death. His suggestion that I not tire myself with volunteer work, his comments about neighborhood events being too much excitement for someone my age, all had been calculated to separate me from potential allies. 2 days before the hearing, James suggested something unexpected, a meeting with Melissa's mother, Catherine Lawson. I had met her only a few times at family events, finding her polite but distant. Like her daughter, she moved in social circles far removed from my own modest existence. Why would she want to meet with me? I asked, puzzled. Surely she supports Thomas and Melissa in this. That's what I assumed too, James replied. But she contacted me directly yesterday. She was disturbed by what she's learned about their actions. She says there are things you should know before the hearing. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private room at James's office building. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a tailored navy dress that had been a splurge for Thomas's business school graduation years earlier. I wanted to project dignity and strength, not play into any preconception of me as a fragile elder. Catherine arrived precisely on time, her silver hair perfectly styled, her linen suit crisp despite the spring humidity. At 65, she was younger than me, but carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding influence. "Margaret," she greeted me, her handshake firm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. This is difficult." We sat across from each other at a small conference table, James beside me as both support and legal counsel. "I want to be direct," Catherine began after declining offers of coffee. "I've always had reservations about how Thomas and Melissa discussed you and your home. The comments were subtle at first. Remarks about the house being too much for you. Concerns about you being isolated in that neighborhood. But after Robert died, the tone changed. The discussions became more calculated." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "About a year ago, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. They were at our summer house in Cape Cod, talking on the deck while I was supposedly napping. Thomas was explaining to Melissa how the development deal would work, how your property was the linchpin because of its location and historical features. He said that getting you to leave voluntarily would be ideal, but he had other options if necessary." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Did they specify what those options were?" Catherine nodded, her discomfort visible. "He mentioned the power of attorney he'd obtained during your hip surgery. Said it was insurance, in case you proved difficult. Melissa asked if it would hold up legally. He said it didn't matter. By the time any challenges worked through the courts, the deal would be done. The cold calculation of it, the assumption that I would either be too intimidated to fight back or too slow in my response to stop them, sent a wave of indignation through me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked directly. "These are serious allegations against your daughter and son-in-law." Catherine's composed facade cracked slightly. "Because my own mother was treated this way by my brother 20 years ago. He used a health crisis to gain control of her assets, then sold the family home out from under her while she was still recovering. She never recovered from the betrayal. Not financially, not emotionally. She died in a nursing home she hated, her dignity stripped away along with her independence." She straightened in her chair. "I didn't speak up then. I believed my brother's assurances that it was for her own good, that she couldn't manage alone anymore. I've regretted that silence every day since. I won't make the same mistake twice, even if it means exposing my own daughter's participation in something unconscionable." James leaned forward. "Mrs. Lawson, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about what you've told us today? It would be powerful evidence at the hearing." Catherine didn't hesitate. "Yes, and I've brought something else that may be useful." She withdrew a USB drive from her purse. Emails between Thomas and Melissa discussing the development deal and their strategies for managing you. They used my computer when theirs was being repaired last month, and these were left in the downloads folder. I'm not technically sophisticated, but even I know how to copy files. James accepted the drive, his expression revealing nothing, but I could sense his excitement at this unexpected windfall of evidence. "Thank you, Mrs. Lawson. This is extremely helpful." After Catherine left, promising to return the next day to sign a formal affidavit, James plugged the drive into his laptop. Together, we read through dozens of emails spanning the past 18 months, a comprehensive chronicle of Thomas and Melissa's scheme. The messages confirmed everything we had pieced together and revealed new details. Thomas had indeed been buying neighboring properties through his shell company, creating a package that would be far more valuable to developers than individual homes. Melissa had researched assisted living facilities, focusing not on quality of care, but on those with the least rigorous admission requirements and the fewest family visitation accommodations. Most damning were the explicit discussions of using the power of attorney to transfer my home to their control regardless of my wishes, and their awareness that doing so was legally dubious at best. "By the time she figures out what happened, if she ever does, we'll have closed the deal and moved the proceeds offshore," Thomas had written. "Elder law cases drag on for years. Even if she fights it, time is on our side, not hers. Time is on our side, not hers." The callousness of the statement, the casual dismissal of both my intelligence and my right to self-determination, crystallized something within me. Any lingering hesitation about pursuing this case to its fullest extent evaporated. "I want everything," I told James, my voice steady and determined. My house secured permanently beyond their reach. All diverted funds returned with interest. The power of attorney not just invalidated, but declared fraudulently obtained. And I want them held accountable, not just civilly, but criminally if possible. James nodded, understanding the shift in my position. With Catherine's testimony and these emails, combined with everything else we've gathered, I believe we can achieve all of that. The judge will see this for exactly what it is: a systematic attempt to defraud a competent older adult of significant assets through manipulation and abuse of legal instruments. That evening, alone in my house that no one would take from me, I felt an unfamiliar sensation gradually replacing the hurt and betrayal that had dominated my emotional landscape since Thomas's attempted takeover. It took me some time to identify it. Anticipation. Not anxiety about what might happen, but a clear-eyed awareness that justice was approaching, that the tables had turned definitively. I walked through each room slowly, touching familiar objects, reaffirming my connection to the space. In Thomas's old bedroom, I finally packed away the childhood mementos I'd preserved long past their relevance, storing them in the attic, rather than keeping them as shrines to a relationship that no longer existed in the form I had cherished. In my bedroom, I rearranged the furniture, moving the bed to face the eastern window, so morning light would be the first thing I saw upon waking. A small change, but symbolic of the larger transformation occurring in my life, no longer oriented around past configurations, but deliberately designed for my comfort and preferences alone. Finally, I sat at my vanity and really looked at myself in the mirror, something I had gradually stopped doing as age altered my appearance in ways society had taught me were undesirable. I saw the silver hair, the lines etched by both laughter and grief, the slight softening beneath my jaw, but I also saw clear eyes that reflected intelligence and determination, a straight spine that had not been broken by betrayal, and an expression of hard-won wisdom. They chose the wrong old lady to underestimate, I told my reflection, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not the polite, accommodating smile I had worn like armor through decades of putting others' needs before my own, but a smile of genuine satisfaction. The battle wasn't over, but the advantage had shifted decisively. Tomorrow would bring final preparations. The day after, the hearing that would formalize my reclamation of independence. And beyond that, a future entirely my own to shape, without manipulation, without deceit, without surrendering my autonomy to anyone. As I prepared for bed, I thought not of Thomas and what I had lost, but of Robert and what he had given me. Not just financial security through his foresight, but the example of his integrity, his courage, his unwavering support of my personhood, separate from any role I fulfilled for others. "I'm fighting back, Robert," I whispered to the darkness, "just like you knew I could." And somewhere, I felt certain, he was smiling too. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright, spring sunshine streaming through the windows I had deliberately left uncurtained the night before. I wanted light, literal and metaphorical, to fill every corner of this day. I dressed with care in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since Robert's funeral, now altered slightly by Mrs. Patel's niece who did tailoring from her home. The fabric was still good, the cut classic, and with a new silk blouse and a soft teal that brought out my eyes, I felt both appropriate and confident. Not a helpless old woman, but a dignified citizen demanding justice. Dolores arrived to drive me to the courthouse, though James had offered to do so. "I want to be there for the whole thing," she'd insisted. "Besides, nothing says supported community member, like arriving with a friend rather than just your attorney." Her instincts were good. As we walked into the courthouse together, I noticed how differently security staff and clerks interacted with me compared to elderly individuals who arrived alone or with only legal representation. There were respectful nods, doors held open, small courtesies that acknowledged me as a person of substance rather than merely a case number or a problem to be processed. James met us in the hallway outside the courtroom, elegant in a navy suit, but with tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "Thomas and Melissa just arrived with their attorney," he informed us quietly. "Gerald Winters, aggressive reputation, specializes in guardianship cases. They've also brought an older man I don't recognize, possibly a medical expert they've arranged." That would be consistent with Thomas's claim to have medical opinions supporting his position, I noted, surprised by my own calmness. "Has Catherine arrived?" "She's already inside. She asked to be seated away from Thomas and Melissa until called to testify." James checked his watch. "The hearing is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. Are you ready for this, Margaret?" I took a deep breath, centering myself. I've been preparing for this moment since Thomas first appeared on my doorstep with eviction in his eyes. Yes, I'm ready, James smiled, his tension easing slightly. You're remarkable, you know that? Most clients in your position would be nervous wrecks by now. I've already lived through the worst of it, I replied. The betrayal, the shock, the hurt, that's all behind me now. This is just the formal acknowledgement of what I already know, that I am competent to manage my own affairs, and that what Thomas attempted was wrong, both legally and morally. We entered the courtroom together, James leading the way to our table on the right side of the center aisle. I deliberately avoided looking at the left table where Thomas and Melissa sat with their attorney, instead focusing on organizing my thoughts and reviewing the key points James and I had prepared. The courtroom gradually filled, my neighbors arriving in small groups, court staff setting up recording equipment, a few individuals who appeared to be law students or perhaps junior attorneys from James's firm taking seats in the back row. The atmosphere was subdued, but charged with purpose. At precisely 10 a.m., the bailiff called for attention as Judge Eleanor Ramirez entered. A woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, she had a reputation for fairness and particular expertise in elder law cases. James had considered her assignment to our case a positive development. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room without seeming to be raised. "We're here in the matter of Wilson Vida. Wilson, petition to invalidate power of attorney on grounds of fraud and undue influence, with additional motions regarding financial exploitation and breach of fiduciary duty." She glanced at her computer screen. "I've reviewed the extensive filings in this case. Given the serious nature of the allegations and counter-allegations, I want to be clear that my primary concern is determining whether Margaret Wilson is capable of managing her own affairs, and if so, whether the power of attorney granted to Thomas Wilson was obtained properly and exercised appropriately." She looked directly at me. "Mrs. Wilson, are you comfortable proceeding today? You have the right to private counsel consultation at any point if needed." "Yes, Your Honor," I replied clearly. "I'm ready to proceed." Judge Ramirez nodded. "Very well. Mr. Sullivan, as petitioner's counsel, you may begin." James rose, his manner relaxed but respectful. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is, at its core, about autonomy and protection. Not protection from Mrs. Wilson's supposed incapacity, as the respondent claims, but protection from exploitation by the very person claiming to act in her interests." For the next 30 minutes, he methodically outlined our case, the circumstances under which the power of attorney had been obtained during my hip surgery recovery, the evidence of Thomas's misuse of that authority to divert pension funds and conceal assets, the documented negotiations with developers regarding my home without my knowledge, and the ultimate attempt to force me into an unnecessary care facility to facilitate the sale of my property. "We have submitted extensive documentation supporting each of these claims," James concluded, including affidavits from Mrs. Wilson's physician confirming her cognitive competence, statements from multiple neighbors attesting to her continued independence and community involvement, and, most significantly, evidence discovered by Mrs. Wilson herself that reveals not just the fact of her son's exploitation, but the deliberate, calculated nature of it, stretching back more than a year. Judge Ramirez turned to Gerald Winters, Thomas's attorney. "Counsel for respondent, your opening statement." Winters rose, a tall man with aggressively styled silver hair and an expensive suit. "Your Honor, we're here today because a concerned son has been trying, perhaps imperfectly but sincerely, to protect his aging mother from risks she cannot or will not acknowledge. The petitioner's characterization of these events as exploitation reflects her unfortunately diminished capacity to understand complex financial matters and her increasing paranoia about family members' intentions." I kept my expression neutral as he continued, spinning a narrative of Thomas as the devoted son, me as the declining mother resistant to necessary assistance, and the power of attorney as a legitimate tool to protect my interests rather than exploit them. It was skillfully done, but fundamentally dishonest, twisting the same facts James had presented into an entirely different story. We have brought an independent geriatric specialist, Dr. Harold Freeman, who conducted a file review and can speak to the warning signs of cognitive decline evident in Mrs. Wilson's behavior. We also have documentation of concerning incidents, missed appointments, confusion about medications, statements to neighbors indicating disorientation that justify Mr. Wilson's efforts to secure appropriate care for his mother. I leaned toward James, whispering, "Those incidents never happened." He nodded slightly, already making notes. "We'll address that." Judge Ramirez studied both attorneys thoughtfully. "Before we proceed to testimony, I'd like to hear directly from Mrs. Wilson herself." She turned to me, her gaze direct but not unkind. "Mrs. Wilson, would you please tell the court, in your own words, why you believe this power of attorney should be invalidated? 1 year has passed since that day in the courtroom. The maple tree outside my kitchen window is again dressed in its autumn finery, the red and gold leaves catching the morning light as I sip my tea. So much has changed. Yet in other ways, life has returned to a comfortable rhythm, but now it's a rhythm entirely of my own choosing." The legal aftermath of Thomas's scheme unfolded gradually in the months following the hearing. The court-ordered accounting revealed even more financial manipulation than we had initially discovered. Beyond the diverted pension funds, Thomas had redirected investment dividends, used my social security number to open credit accounts, and systematically siphoned smaller amounts from my checking account, amounts he thought would go unnoticed by an elderly woman presumed to be inattentive to. Financial details. The total sum he had appropriated over 5 years exceeded $230,000. Under James Sullivan's skilled guidance, we pursued full restitution. Thomas initially balked, claiming inability to repay such a substantial amount, but the specter of criminal charges for elder financial exploitation proved persuasive. Within 6 months, every cent had been returned with interest. I chose not to press criminal charges, not out of maternal softness, but pragmatic assessment. The civil resolution was cleaner, faster, and more certain. And there was a different kind of justice in Thomas having to liquidate his precious investment properties, the very ones he had purchased with my diverted funds, to make restitution. The restraining order remains in place. I have had no direct contact with Thomas or Melissa since the courthouse. Through attorneys, I learned they have relocated to Chicago, where Melissa's company offered her a transfer. Thomas's career in financial services suffered after several colleagues learned of his actions through industry channels. Not criminal consequences, perhaps, but professional and social repercussions nonetheless. Catherine Lawson, Melissa's mother, and I have developed an unexpected friendship. Her courage in testifying against her own daughter's interests forged a bond between us. We meet monthly for lunch, 2 women of similar age but different backgrounds, united by our determination to live authentically in our later years and our first-hand understanding of family betrayal. Melissa hasn't spoken to me since the hearing. She confided during our most recent lunch. "Thomas sends a perfunctory birthday card each year, but that's the extent of it. Do you regret your choice?" I asked, genuinely curious. She shook her head firmly. "Not for a moment. I couldn't have lived with myself otherwise. My own mother's voice would have haunted me. I understood completely. Robert's voice had guided me through my darkest moments. Sometimes, the true legacy of those we've lost isn't their material provisions, but their moral compass that continues pointing us toward right action long after they're gone. My home remains my sanctuary, but I've made changes that reflect my evolving needs and preferences. With some of the recovered funds, I renovated the first floor to include a bedroom and full bathroom, anticipating that stairs might eventually become challenging. Not because Thomas's concerns about my ability to manage were valid, but because I am clear-eyed about aging on my terms, with adaptations that support independence rather than surrender it. Robert's office has become my creative space, a room filled with watercolor supplies, a comfortable reading chair, and a small desk where I write regularly. My memoir is taking shape slowly, not just the story of Thomas's betrayal, but the fuller narrative of a woman's journey through the changing landscapes of mid-20th century America into the complexities of 21st century aging. My social world has expanded remarkably. The neighbors who rallied around me during the crisis have become true friends. We've established a weekly dinner rotation, taking turns hosting small gatherings that combine good food with better conversation. Dolores and I travel together several times a year, modest excursions to coastal towns or historical sites, with a more ambitious trip to the Grand Canyon finally fulfilled last spring. Robert would have been pleased. I've also found meaningful engagement through unexpected channels. James Sullivan connected me with a local advocacy group for elder rights, where I now volunteer twice monthly, sharing my experience to help others recognize and resist exploitation. My story, it turns out, is far from unique, though my outcome of successful resistance is rarer than it should be. You put a face on elder justice, the program director told me recently. When older adults see someone who fought back and won, it changes their perception of what's possible. This new purpose has been healing in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Each time I help another older person recognize manipulation or assert their rights, the pain of Thomas's betrayal recedes further, transformed into something constructive, rather than merely painful. Financial security has been fully restored and enhanced. The pension adjustment was made retroactive, providing a substantial lump sum payment, in addition to the increased monthly benefit. The life insurance proceeds Thomas had attempted to divert were released to me with accumulated interest. Robert's investment accounts, now under my direct management, with occasional professional guidance, continue to grow modestly but steadily. I've revised my will, of course. Thomas has been removed as beneficiary. Instead, my estate will be divided between several charitable foundations focused on elder justice, arts education, and veterans support, causes Robert and I both valued. A smaller portion will go to Catherine, whose courage cost her a relationship with her daughter, and whose retirement is less secure than mine. The development company that had been negotiating with Thomas eventually approached me directly, offering a substantial sum for my property. I declined politely but firmly. This house, with its memories both sweet and bitter, remains where I choose to live out my days. The neighborhood has resisted the luxury development push, maintaining its character as a mixed community of younger families and aging-in-place residents like myself. This morning, I received a letter, an actual paper letter, handwritten on heavy stationery. The return address was Chicago, the handwriting unmistakably Thomas's. I recognized it immediately. Some aspects of our children remain imprinted on us regardless of what transpires between us. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it, weighing not just the physical object, but the potential impact of its contents on the peace I've cultivated. Curiosity eventually won out. The letter was brief. Thomas expressed regret, not with dramatic confessions or pleas for forgiveness, but with the simple acknowledgement that his actions had been inexcusable. He mentioned therapy, a word I never would have expected from the son who had dismissed my suggestion of counseling during his difficult teenage years. He made no request to resume contact, imposed no obligation for response, offered no excuses for his behavior. "I only want you to know," he wrote in closing, "that I recognize the harm I caused to someone who deserved better from me. The lessons about integrity that you and Dad tried to teach me came very late, but they did eventually take root." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, unsure how I felt about this unexpected communication, or whether I would ever respond. That decision doesn't need to be made today, or tomorrow, or perhaps ever. The power to choose my own timeline for such matters is itself a form of freedom I once feared lost. As I finish my morning tea, watching a cardinal alight briefly on the maple branch outside my window, I reflect on the journey of the past year. The betrayal by my son nearly destroyed me, not just financially or practically, but spiritually. The questioning of my worth, my competence, my right to self-determination had cut deeper than the material threats to my security. But surviving that betrayal, fighting back, and ultimately prevailing, taught me something essential that perhaps could have come no other way. My value was never contingent on Thomas's recognition of it. My competence didn't require his acknowledgement to exist. My right to direct my own life wasn't his to grant or withhold. These truths seem obvious stated plainly, yet how many of us, especially women of my generation, internalized the belief that our worth and wisdom required external validation? How many of us diminished ourselves to accommodate others' narratives about who we were and what we deserved? At 74, silver-haired and slightly stooped, but clear-eyed and resolute, I have finally and completely shed that limiting belief. The betrayal that might have broken me instead revealed my true strength, not just to others, but more importantly, to myself. I rise from my chair by the window, rinsing my teacup in the sink before heading out for my morning walk. The day stretches before me, filled with choices that are genuinely mine. A volunteer shift at the library, lunch with Mrs. Patel, perhaps an hour of painting if the light remains good this afternoon. Small freedoms that contain within them the profound liberty of self-determination. As I step onto my porch, adjusting my light jacket against the autumn chill, I notice new neighbors moving in across the street. A young couple with a toddler, bringing fresh life to our little community. I wave in welcome, and they wave back, the woman calling out a cheerful greeting. This too is part of the natural order. Renewal, continuation, the passing of seasons. The maple leaves will fall, winter will come, but spring always returns. Nothing, not even betrayal by those closest to us, can permanently derail that cycle of renewal if we refuse to surrender our place within it. I begin my walk, breathing deeply of the crisp morning air. Each step an affirmation of independence hard-won and fiercely protected. The deed to my home is in my name alone, but the deed to my life, my choices, my future, my self-worth, that has always been mine. It just took a crisis for me to fully claim it.